I woke up in a daze, feeling like I had just been drugged. The last thing I remembered was driving home after a long shift at the hospital, where I worked as a nurse. I tried to sit up, but I couldn't move my arms or legs. Panic soon set in, as I realized that I was strapped to a cold, metal table. Looking around, I saw that I was in a dimly lit room with strange equipment lining the walls. The air was filled with an awful smell that I can only describe as burned metal. Then I heard a soft humming sound, like a low-pitched chant. Suddenly, a bright light filled the room, and I shielded my eyes, but once the light had faded, that's when I saw them. They were not human. They were tall, thin, and grey, with large, almond-shaped black eyes. They had long arms and fingers, with no discernible mouths or noses. I struggled to free myself from the restraints, but they were on too tight. The figures started to approach me, and I could feel their cold, slimy touch on my skin as they began to examine me. I could see the fear in their eyes as they probed me with strange instruments. They seemed fascinated by my body, studying me as if I were some kind of rare specimen. As the probing continued, I began to feel a strange sense of detachment, as if I was no longer in my body. I felt as if I was floating, weightless and free. It was as if the aliens were able to control my thoughts and emotions, and that was possibly the scariest thing of all. The probing lasted for what felt like hours, and when it was finally over, they left the room, leaving me alone, yet still strapped to the cold table. I laid there, shivering and confused, trying to make sense of what the hell just happened. Well, after a long struggle, I was finally able to free myself from the restraints, and staggered out of the room, disoriented. As I stumbled down the dark hallway, I realized that I was no longer in the same place where I had been abducted. Everything was unfamiliar, and I had no idea where I was, or how I would ever find my way back home. I wandered through the corridors of the strange metallic structure, looking for any sign of escape. But no matter how far I walked, I seemed to be going in circles, always ending up in the same room where I had been probed and examined. As time passed, I grew weaker and more disoriented. My mind was filled with strange thoughts, and I began to wonder if I would ever be able to escape. Eventually, I gave up, and I returned to the room to get some sleep. The next morning, I decided to start searching again, and I stumbled upon a room filled with strange, glowing crystals. As I approached them, I felt a sudden surge of energy, and my body began to levitate off the ground. With a sudden burst of courage, I flew through the walls of the alien ship and out into the vast expanse of space. The sight that greeted me was both breathtaking and terrifying. The stars seemed to stretch out endlessly in every direction, and I could see planets and galaxies beyond anything I had ever imagined. But even as I marveled at the wonders of the universe, I knew that I was still in grave danger. The aliens were surely searching for me, and it was only a matter of time before they found me and brought me back. I flew on, driven by a desperate need to survive, and as I soared through the infinite reaches of space, I realized that the aliens had taken something from me, something precious and irreplaceable, and I was determined to get it back. With every passing moment, I grew stronger and more determined. And as I raced through the cosmos, I knew that I would stop at nothing to reclaim what had been stolen from me, for I was no longer a mere human being. I was something much more, something greater that the aliens had never seen before. As I flew on, I began to feel a strange power coursing through me, as if the very fabric of the universe was now at my command. I could feel the energy of the stars and the planets flowing through me, and I knew that I was no longer bound by the limitations of my physical body. And with this newfound power, I set out to track down the aliens who had abducted me, determined to make them pay for what they had done. I searched the vastness of space, following every clue and lead that I could find, until I finally stumbled upon what was their home planet. It was sad, really. They lived on a desolate, barren place, filled with towering spires of metal and strange, pulsing energy fields. But I still didn't hesitate. With a fierce determination, I swooped down, unleashing my newfound powers upon them. The aliens were caught off guard, unable to comprehend the power that I now possessed. They tried to fight back, but it was no use. I was too strong, too powerful, and in the end, they were no match for me. As I stood over their defeated bodies, I knew that I had finally reclaimed what had been taken from me. I had regained my freedom, my autonomy, and my sense of self. And as I looked out over the endless expanse of space, I knew that I had become something much more than just a simple human being. I was now a force to be reckoned with, a being of immense power and potential. And so, with a sense of triumph and purpose, I set out once more into the stars, ready to explore the universe and discover the mysteries that lay hidden within its depths. For I was no longer a victim of the aliens' cruel experiments. I was a warrior, a survivor, and a symbol of hope for all of those who had been taken by the unknown and the unknowable.
Oliver, it's time to take your meds. Now, don't make me come and get you.
Ah, yes. And what was my reward for this triumph? Well, as soon as I returned to Earth, expecting a parade, instead, I was thrown into a loony bin with a bunch of degenerates. But it doesn't matter. I'll show them. One day, they will see my true power.
Oliver, how many times do I have to tell you?
Back in the 80s, I lived on my family's farm. It was a beautiful place, with rolling hills, lush green fields, and a sense of peace and tranquility that was hard to find anywhere else. But one summer, my overwhelmingly positive view of such a beautiful place had completely turned on its head. I remember I was out checking on the crops at the time when I saw it. A perfect circle in the middle of one of our cornfields. At first I thought it was just a strange natural occurrence, but as I walked closer, I realized that it was something else entirely. The grass in the circle was flattened, as if something heavy had landed there, but there was no sign of any tracks, and no indication of what could have caused it. It was like the circle had simply appeared out of nowhere. Well, safe to say, I was spooked, but I tried to brush it off as one of those strange coincidences. Perhaps a group of animals had gathered there, or maybe it was just some strange weather phenomenon. I was never a believer in UFOs or anything extraterrestrial, so it was quite easy for me to shrug it off. But then, a few days later, another circle appeared, in a different field. This one was larger, and there were strange symbols etched into the grass. They looked like some kind of ancient script, but I couldn't make sense of them. It was honestly like nothing I had ever seen before. I didn't know what else to do, so I just tried to ignore it. But as the days went on, more and more circles started to appear. They were all different sizes, with strange markings etched into the grass, and every time a new one appeared, I felt a sense of unease deep in my gut. I started to do some research, trying to find out if anyone else had experienced something similar. I found other stories of crop circles, of strange patterns appearing in fields all over the world. Some people believed they were hoaxes, while others claimed they were the work of extraterrestrial beings. I didn't know what to believe, but the more circles that appeared on our farm, the more I felt like something otherworldly was at play. One night I decided to camp out in the field where the circles had first appeared. I wanted to see if I could catch whatever was causing them in the act. I was lying there watching the stars when I saw something move. It was a black figure half emerged in the cornfield, but I could just about make out a tall and slender body. I was very startled and tried to run, but that's when I heard it start speaking to me, in a language I didn't understand. I don't remember much after that. When I rack my brain to try and remember what happened, all I see is a blur of strange lights, distorted voices, and a feeling of being pulled in a million different directions at once. When I woke up, I was back in my tent, but something was different. The world around me now seemed brighter, more vivid. The colours were more vibrant, the air was cleaner, and the sounds were sharper. I felt like I had been reborn, like everything was new and exciting. But as the days went on, I started to notice that things weren't quite right. My senses were heightened to an almost unbearable degree, and I started to see things that weren't there. Shadows would move when there was no one around, and strange whispers would echo in my ears. Well, this wasn't the only time I saw that figure, as one night I saw it again, standing at the edge of the field, watching me. Once again, I could just about hear its voice speaking to me, but this time I could understand it. From what I could gather, it told me that it was from another world, that it had been studying our planet for centuries, and it had chosen me. It said it wanted me to be its representative on Earth, to help it understand our ways and our customs. At first I was afraid, but the more I talked to the creature, the more I realized that it truly meant no harm. It was simply curious, and it wanted to learn. So, I agreed to help. The creature slowly stepped forward toward me, but as it began to get closer to me, suddenly it vanished. I was left with so many questions, but as strange as it all was, I still knew that I had been chosen for a reason. I was meant to help bridge the gap between our two worlds, to help us understand each other and work together for the greater good. I still have that feeling like I'm being watched, but now it isn't so bad. If anything, it feels like a good friend is watching over me. So now, every time I see another crop circle on our farm, I smile, knowing that it's a sign that my friend from another world is still watching over me, still curious and still learning. And I feel more than grateful that I was chosen to be a part of something so extraordinary. I always loved spending time in my garden. It was my very own little oasis, a place where I could escape from the stress of everyday life and immerse myself in the beauty of nature. But everything changed in that one night. I remember I was out in my garden, admiring the stars, when I suddenly saw something move out of the corner of my eye. At first I thought it must have been a deer or a raccoon, but as I turned to get a better look, I realized that it was something else entirely. Standing in the middle of my garden was a creature unlike anything I had ever seen before. It was tall and slender, and had skin that shimmered in the moonlight. Its limbs were long and thin, and the best way I can describe it is that it looked almost like a humanoid praying mantis. I stood there in my garden, frozen, unable to move or speak, as the creature slowly approached me. I could feel its eyes boring into my soul, studying me, and then out of nowhere, I felt a sudden jolt of pain in my head, as if someone had flicked a switch in my brain. My thoughts had become fuzzy, and my vision blurry. I stumbled backwards, unable to maintain my balance. And then everything went black. Once I eventually came to, I found myself lying on the ground, surrounded by the strange, otherworldly flora that had now sprung up around me. I felt groggy and disoriented, as if I had been asleep for days. I heard a sound. It was a low, rumbling hum, like the sound of 1,000 bees buzzing in unison. I looked up and saw a creature hovering above me, its limbs outstretched, as if it were about to embrace me. I tried to scream, to run, to do anything to escape, but it was as if I was paralyzed, trapped in this nightmare world with no way to escape. The creature descended, its shimmering skin still glinting in the moonlight. Its eyes met mine, and I felt a sense of overwhelming dread wash over me. I knew that I was in the presence of something quite powerful. It stared at me for a while, before suddenly the creature vanished, leaving me alone on my garden floor. At first I just laid there, still trying to come to terms with what had just happened to me. But eventually I finally found the strength to get up, and I stumbled back into my house, my mind racing with many questions. What had that creature just done to me? Had it taken something from me? And the most important question, was I still in danger? Well, over the next few days, no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling that that creature was still out there, somewhere, waiting for its next move, and I would always notice strange things happening around my house that I couldn't explain. For example, my phone would ring, but when I answered, there was no one on the other end. My TV would flicker on and off, even when I had turned it off before going to bed. And worst of all, I began to have vivid nightmares about that creature. Dreams where it would visit me in my room, its eyes gleaming in the darkness. I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know what. I couldn't tell anyone about this. What would they think? So I began to research, determined to find any way to protect myself against whatever that creature was. I lived in fear for a while after that, never knowing when he may strike. But all of my anticipation suddenly came to a head when I looked out my window one night to see that very same creature crawling around on the grass. I instinctively ran to my closet and grabbed a baseball bat, ready to defend myself and to deal with this creature once and for all. But when I turned back to face the window, the creature was gone. I walked out into the garden and searched the area, but there was no sign of it. And yet, I knew that it was still out there. Well, safe to say, from that moment on, I was never the same. And even now, years later, I can still feel its presence, lurking just beyond the veil of reality, waiting for its chance to strike once more. I had always been interested in the unknown, the unexplained. So, when I saw something strange in the sky that night, I knew I had to investigate it. Once I saw it, I knew it was a UFO, no doubt about it, a glowing, disc-shaped object hovering in the air, its lights pulsing and shifting in eerie patterns. I watched it for what felt like hours, mesmerized by the sight. And then, suddenly, it began to move. It darted across the sky, faster than anything I had ever seen before. And then, just as suddenly, it vanished, leaving me alone in the darkness. At first, I was exhilarated. I had witnessed something quite amazing, something that very few people had ever seen before. But as the days went on, my exhilaration soon turned to fear. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched or followed. Everywhere I went, I felt as if there were eyes on me, unseen and unblinking. And then, it all came to a head one night, when I suddenly woke up in my bed, unable to move. It was as if I was paralyzed, frozen in place. I could feel a cold breeze on my skin, and I heard a strange humming sound, like a distant generator. And that's when I saw them. They were tall and slender, with pale, elongated heads and large black eyes. They moved with a fluid grace, their movements eerily silent. I couldn't speak, couldn't move, and couldn't even scream. They approached me, and I could feel their cold, clammy hands on my skin, probing and examining me. But then, just as suddenly as it had started, it was over. They left me alone, trembling and sweating in my room. I didn't know what to do, or who to turn to. I felt as if I was losing my mind, slipping further and further into a nightmare world where nothing made sense. Well, after around a week, I saw that UFO again. But this time, it was hovering over my house, with its lights pulsing and shifting in a pattern that almost seemed to mock me. I knew then that I was being targeted and monitored, and that I was in grave danger. But I still didn't know what to do, or how to defend myself. Days turned into weeks, and my fear and paranoia only grew. I tried to tell my friends and family about what had happened, but they just looked at me with pity and concern. Of course, they didn't believe me, and just thought I was imagining things, or it was probably a dream. But I knew what I had seen, what I had experienced, and I also knew that I couldn't just sit back and wait for them to return. I began to research. I scoured the internet for any information I could find on UFOs. I read books, watched documentaries, talked to people who claimed to have had similar experiences. And then, one day, I found it. A group of people who called themselves the Resistance. They were a network of individuals who had all experienced UFO sightings and other abductions, and they had banded together to fight back. Well, I reached out to them immediately, desperate for help and guidance, and to my surprise, they responded. They invited me to a meeting where I met other people who had been through what I had. We shared our stories, our hopes and our fears, and then they showed me something that changed everything. It was a device, some sort of weapon that they claimed could protect us from the aliens if they ever did return. It was a small handheld device that emitted a high-frequency sound that was supposedly unbearable to the aliens. I was skeptical at first, but again, I was desperate. I snatched the device out of their hand and promised to use it if I ever did see that UFO again. Well, days soon turned into weeks, and then into months, and I started to feel like I would never see that UFO ever again. But then, one night, it finally returned. I was walking home from work when I saw the UFO hovering over my house once again. But this time, I was ready. I grabbed the device and I aimed it directly at the UFO and pressed the button. I saw the UFO begin to shake, tremble, and eventually explode into a burst of light and sound. And then it was all over. The sky was silent, still, and I knew that I had won. But even as I celebrated my victory, I knew that I could never go back to the life I once had before. I had seen too much, experienced too much, and I knew that they were still out there, watching and waiting, and no doubt plotting their revenge. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed the video. I just wanted to take a quick moment to thank you all for helping me reach the massive milestone of 500 subscribers this week. When I started this channel 3 months ago, to be honest with you, I had absolutely no idea how it would go, and so I had very little expectation. In fact, the only target I set myself was to create 100 videos by the end of the year, and to try and improve as much as possible in that time. So it's safe to say, I certainly did not think that I would be halfway to 1,000 subscribers at this point. To be completely transparent with you, when I started making these videos, I was completely unaware just how oversaturated this genre was. There are so many talented horror narrators out there, which does make it very difficult to compete. But this fact also makes me so grateful that you actually choose to watch one of my videos when there are so many other options out there. I can't even begin to explain just how much I truly appreciate all of your support. And going forward, I just hope I can keep putting out content that you want to see. The main aim of this channel has always been to provide new and unheard stories, which is why I tend to write most of my own. However, if you do have any of your own stories that you are yet to expose to the world, I would be honoured to narrate them on this channel, so please feel free to get in touch if you're interested. You can find me on pretty much all social medias under the same name, @MrStorybot. Otherwise, all links can be found in the description below, although I would say you'll probably have more luck on Twitter or Reddit, as I tend to be more active on those platforms. Anyway, I won't take up any more of your time, but I just want to say thank you once again for listening, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.